Welcome to Nocturnal Tales. Tonight, we step into a world of polished manners, private fortunes, and a question that should not exist. How does a man vanish while everyone is watching? Our story is The Vanishing of Monsieur d'Aubel, a mystery of tight spaces, careful lies, and the thin line between what we see and what we only assume we saw. As always, this is an original Nocturnal Tales story, written in the spirit and style of the great Golden Age mysteries, but entirely our own creation. And if you'd like more stories, you can find our full back catalogue on Patreon and Spotify, with extra new stories there as well. The links are in the description. Now then, listen closely, keep your conclusions in check, and do not trust the obvious too soon. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Door in the Sky. It is one of the stranger privileges of wealthy men that they imagine the world cannot misplace them. A poor fellow vanishes, and the explanation is usually found in a ditch, a cheap room, or a bottle. A rich man vanishes, and the explanation must be elegant. Preferably the sort of elegance that frightens policemen and sells newspapers. That morning's headline lay on Poirot's breakfast tray like an accusation. Belgian financier disappears from private aeroplane. Poirot read it once, then again, with a small disapproving sound, as though the printing ink had offended his sense of order. "Another scandal?" I asked, stretching in my chair by the fire. Poirot folded the paper with care. "Not a scandal, Hastings, a problem." "A problem? In the sky?" I sat up. "Don't be ridiculous." "On the contrary," said Poirot. "Ridiculous is often where the truth hides best. A man cannot vanish from an aeroplane without someone assisting him, or without the man himself arranging it." Before I could argue, the bell rang. The visitor was young, well-dressed in a coat that had begun to lose its battle with travel, and possessed of the hollow-eyed politeness of someone who has not slept. He introduced himself as Monsieur Lucien Verhaeghe, private secretary to the missing man, Monsieur Etienne d'Aubel. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, bowing, "I have come from Brussels. We require your help." Poirot did not make him wait in the corridor while he adjusted his moustaches. An omission, I assure you, that meant the matter had already seized his interest. Verhaeghe sat rigidly, a glass of brandy untouched at his elbow. "Begin," Poirot said gently. "From the beginning. And do not try to be polite with facts." Verhaeghe swallowed. "Monsieur d'Aubel left Croydon yesterday at 10 in the morning. The aircraft is his, private, small, 6 passenger seats besides the pilot and mechanic." "And the passengers?" "There were 4, Verhaeghe replied. Myself, Madame Sabine de Rochefort, Monsieur Henri Le Maire, and Monsieur Charles Avery." Poirot's eyes narrowed a fraction. "Friends?" Verhaeghe's mouth tightened. "Not exactly. Continue." The flight was calm. Monsieur Le Maire smoked a cigar. Monsieur Avery talked, always talking. Madame de Rochefort had a travelling cloak and a scent that filled the cabin. He paused, then added with a careful neutrality, "Monsieur d'Aubel worked on documents. He disliked interruption." "And then," I prompted, "he vanished?" "Not at once." Verhaeghe's fingers tightened on the chair arm. "Near the Belgian coast there was a sound at the rear of the cabin. A sharp noise. Metal, perhaps." Poirot's head tilted. "The mechanic heard it?" "Yes. He called from the cockpit partition. Monsieur d'Aubel replied that all was well. He said there was smoke, and he had opened a vent." "A vent," Poirot repeated softly. "Monsieur Le Maire's cigar," Verhaeghe said, as if the cigar itself were on trial. "After that?" Poirot asked. "We settled again. Madame de Rochefort complained of cold. Monsieur Dobell stood, fetched a rug from the storage compartment and gave it to her. Monsieur Avery told a story about a racehorse. Monsieur Le Maire laughed too loudly. I made notes. Verhaeghe's eyes lifted. It was ordinary. And on landing? Verhaeghe's voice roughened. On landing at HAREN, the door was opened, the steps put down, and we disembarked. Monsieur Dobell did not. He was not in his seat, not in the little lavatory, not on the floor, not anywhere. I could not help it. Good God! Was he still on the plane, hidden? It was searched at once, Verhaeghe said. Twice. Every compartment. The police were thorough. Poirot's tone remained calm. And the rear exit? Verhaeghe hesitated. It was found unlatched. Then he fell out, I said, feeling suddenly foolish even as I spoke. Or jumped, Verhaeghe replied. Poirot watched him. And you believe it was neither? Verhaeghe's eyes flickered. Monsieur Dobell had enemies. He was involved in negotiations, money, influence. If he is dead, certain people profit. If he is alive, other people profit. Poirot leaned back. Who profits most from his absence? Verhaeghe answered too quickly. Monsieur Le Maire. Poirot did not comment, but I saw the faintest tightening around his eyes, the sign he gives when a man is trying too hard to appear certain. And Monsieur Avery? Poirot asked. A British investor, said Verhaeghe. Charming, always charming. He could sell you your own umbrella and make you thank him for the shade. And Madame de Rochefort? Verhaeghe's gaze dropped to the untouched brandy. She was close to Monsieur Dobell. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Close is also not a category. It is a risk. Verhaeghe's voice lowered. There are letters. If they become public, it will be a scandal, and Monsieur Dobell had no tolerance for scandal unless he created it himself. Poirot stood. We go to Brussels. At once? Verhaeghe blurted, startled. At once, Poirot said, because in cases like this, Hastings, the first hours are when the lies are still warm. We travelled that evening, and by morning Brussels lay beneath a heavy sky the colour of old pewter. Poirot chose the Hôtel Métropole, of course he did, because Poirot prefers his mysteries with clean sheets and competent coffee. In the lobby we were met by Inspector Joubert, a thick-set man with polite eyes and a mouth shaped by long disappointment. Monsieur Poirot, he said, shaking hands, I am glad you have come. It is, how you say, impossible. Impossible, Poirot replied, is often merely unexamined. Joubert led us out to the aerodrome hangar where the aircraft had been kept sealed. The machine stood there, sleek and respectable, now made faintly indecent by suspicion, like a drawing-room chair where someone has died. Inside, the cabin smelled of cold leather, cigar smoke, and perfume that had nowhere to go. Joubert indicated the layout: 2 rows of seats, a small table, the partition to cockpit, and at the rear, the emergency door. Poirot walked the aisle slowly, not touching much, yet seeing everything. He glanced at the ashtray. He studied the storage compartment from which the rug had been taken. He paused by the rear door, examining the latch with the attention of a jeweller. He did not open it. Instead, he turned to Joubert. Show me the statements. Joubert produced a file. Poirot scanned pages quickly. Too quickly, I thought, until I remembered that Poirot reads people more than paper. And the passengers? Poirot asked. In Brussels, Joubert said. Under watch, not arrested. They are respectable, and therefore offended. Poirot's eyes returned to the rear door. Respectable people, he murmured, are the most dangerous, Inspector. They have so much practice at appearing innocent. He faced us then, very neat and very certain. "One of two things has happened," Poirot said. "Either Monsieur Daubel went out of that door, or someone wishes us to believe he did." Inspector Joubert frowned. "But how else?" Poirot's gaze moved over the seats, the table, the little lavatory curtain. Every ordinary object now made suspicious by one missing man. "How else?" Poirot repeated softly. "Ah, that is the question. And it is always answered by a second question, Inspector." He lifted a finger, as if conducting an invisible orchestra. "Not! How did he vanish?" Poirot's voice sharpened. "But when did he vanish?" And with that, for the first time since reading the headline, I felt the case stop being absurd and start being dangerous. Chapter 2. The Four Who Remained. Inspector Joubert was not a stupid man, but he had the handicap of being a policeman. He wished to arrest the mystery as quickly as possible and bring it to the station for questioning. Poirot, on the other hand, treated a mystery the way a good cook treats a sauce. He allowed it to reduce until the flavor became unavoidable. "You say," Joubert insisted, "that the moment is important. But we know the moment. Between England and Belgium, between Croydon and HAREN." Poirot glanced at him with a patience that was almost pity. "You know the geography. You do not yet know the truth." He turned to the aircraft again, and this time he did something that made Joubert stiffen. Poirot sat down, not on any seat at random, but in the one that, according to the statements, had belonged to Monsieur Daubel. He placed his hands neatly on his knees and looked around the cabin as though he were attending a dull recital. "Now," he said to me, "you will be my eyes, Hastings. Stand there, by the table. Imagine you are Monsieur Avery and you wish to be seen." It is not pleasant to be instructed like furniture, but I obeyed. Poirot's little games often have a point, and besides he was paying for the hotel. Poirot addressed the empty cabin as though it were full. "Monsieur le Maire," he said, "you sit there with your cigar. Madame de Rochefort, you are here, with your cloak and your perfume. Monsieur Verhaeghe, there, writing your notes." Joubert watched, arms folded. Poirot's voice remained conversational. "Now tell me, Hastings, if I stand to fetch a rug for a lady, how many seconds do I leave my seat empty?" "A few," I said. "And if I go to the rear door to open a vent?" "Still only a few." Poirot's eyes glittered. "Just so. Therefore, if the disappearance happened in the way they describe, door unlatching, a man stepping out into air, then someone must have noticed more than a few seconds. A movement, a draft, a change in sound. A cry, perhaps. Even rich men are not quiet when they fall." Joubert grunted. "Unless he jumped deliberately." "Even a deliberate jump makes a noise," Poirot said mildly. "And if he jumped, he chose to do it in a cabin containing 3 people who were, by their own accounts, not watching him. That is very convenient. For them." He stood and brushed an imaginary speck from his sleeve. "Let us meet our respectable passengers," he said. "Respectable people tell lies beautifully." We found them in a private sitting room at the Hôtel Métropole, Joubert's concession to their status. A policeman at the door, another in the corridor, and inside, velvet chairs, good lighting, and 4 faces arranged with varying degrees of offence. Monsieur Verhaeghe rose at once, anxious to appear helpful. The others did not. Monsieur Henri le Maire was heavy-jowled, expensively dressed, and carried the ease of a man accustomed to being obeyed. His fingers smelled faintly of tobacco even now, as though the cigar were part of his identity. Monsieur Charles Avery was English, elegant, and smiling in the careful way of a man who always keeps an exit available, socially, if not physically. Madame Sabine de Rochefort was, in a word, dangerous. Beautiful, certainly, but not sweet. Her eyes were clear and cold, and her hands, gloved though they were, had an impatient expressiveness. Poirot greeted them with perfect courtesy, then sat as if he owned the room. "You will forgive me," he said, "if I ask questions that are inconvenient. It is my profession." Avery smiled wider. "We are all eager to assist, Monsieur Poirot. The whole affair is simply extraordinary." "Extraordinary," Poirot agreed. "And yet it happened. Therefore it is also ordinary enough to be explained." He began gently, as he always did, letting each person repeat the story already given to police. It is astonishing how often people alter a detail when they believe they are merely repeating it. Le Maire spoke first, confident, irritated, offended by the very notion of suspicion. "I saw Dobell working," he said. "He barely spoke. The only excitement was that the cabin grew smoky. My cigar, yes, and he opened the rear vent. Later I remember him standing to fetch Madame the rug. That is all." Poirot's eyes flicked to the man's fingers. "You smoke what brand, Monsieur Le Maire?" Le Maire blinked. "Pardon? What brand? Why does it matter?" Poirot's voice remained polite. "Because details matter. If they did not, you would not be offended by them." Le Maire named the cigar. Poirot nodded as though satisfied and turned to Avery. "And you, Monsieur Avery?" Avery clasped his hands. "I spoke with him. He was in excellent spirits, if you can call it that, with men like Dobell, who treat cheerfulness as an investment. He mentioned Brussels, banking matters, and then he went back to his papers. When we landed, the seat was empty. Frankly, it made my blood run cold." Madame de Rochefort gave a small, contemptuous laugh. Poirot's gaze slid to her. "Madame, you laugh?" "Men always say their blood runs cold," she replied. "It sounds dramatic. It makes them feel human." Avery's smile tightened. Poirot inclined his head. "And your own blood, madame? Did it run cold?" She shrugged as though discussing a weather change. "It was inconvenient." "Inconvenient?" Joubert repeated, unable to help himself. Madame looked at him as one looks at a servant who speaks without being addressed. Monsieur Dobell was not a man who was pleasant to lose. Poirot's tone remained mild. "Tell me your account." She leaned back. "He gave me a rug. I was tired. I closed my eyes. The engine is a lullaby, yes? When we landed, the world had changed. That is all." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "You slept? How long?" "As long as I wished." "Did you hear the noise at the rear?" "I heard a noise," she said. "A small noise. Men and machines always make small noises." Poirot turned to Verhaeghe last. "And you, Monsieur Verhaeghe, you were writing notes? You heard the noise? You looked up?" "Yes." "You saw Monsieur Dobell in his seat?" "Yes." "You are certain?" Verhaeghe hesitated, just a fraction. "As certain as one can be." Poirot's voice softened. "Ah, that is better. Now we speak like honest people." He rose and walked to the mantelpiece where a small vase of flowers sat. Irrelevant, decorative, and yet Poirot examined it as if it were evidence. This was typical. He looked away to make others look at each other. Then he asked, without turning, "Which of you opened the rear door after the noise?" 4 voices answered at once. "Not I." Poirot nodded, as if he had expected nothing else. He turned back to them. "Then allow me to tell you what I believe." The air in the room tightened. Even Madame de Rochefort sat a little stiller. "I believe," Poirot said, "that one of you is telling the truth. Perhaps even 2. But not all 4. Avery gave a soft chuckle. "Surely, Monsieur Poirot—" Poirot cut him off with a raised hand, still polite but final. There is a difference, he said, between what you saw and what you assume you saw. In a small cabin, with a sound like metal, and a man who stands once and then is gone, there is one fact you have all avoided. Lemaire's jaw tightened. Avoided nothing. Poirot's eyes flashed. You avoided looking. Each of you, at the crucial moment, did not look. Madame de Rochefort's lips curved. And yet we must have been looking at something. Exactly, Poirot said. So I ask you, what held your attention? Silence. Poirot's gaze moved across them, one by one, like a blade testing for weakness. Monsieur le Maire, he said softly, you had your cigar and your pride. Monsieur Avery, you had your stories and your charm. Madame, you had your sleep, convenient, luxurious sleep. And Monsieur Verhaeghe, you had your notebook. Verhaeghe flushed. I was doing my duty. Poirot nodded. Perhaps. Or perhaps you were writing something you did not wish anyone to read. Joubert shifted, suddenly alert. Poirot lifted a hand again, calming the room as one calms a skittish horse. I do not accuse, he said. Not yet. I merely observe. And I will make one more observation before we finish. He stepped closer to Madame de Rochefort. Madame, he said, you said Monsieur d'Aubel was inconvenient to lose. Tell me, did he intend to dismiss you? For the first time her composure cracked, not with fear but with anger. That, she said, is none of your business. Poirot's voice was gentle, almost kind. It is exactly my business. Madame's eyes hardened again. Monsieur d'Aubel intended many things. He intended to control people. He intended to humiliate Monsieur le Maire. He intended to keep Monsieur Avery paying. He intended... She stopped herself. Poirot's eyes shone. Yes. She said very clearly, he intended to survive. Avery leaned forward. What does that mean? Madame smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. It means, she said, that if he vanished, it was because he wanted to vanish. Poirot stepped back. Merci, madame, he said quietly. That is the first useful thing said in this room. When we left, Joubert exhaled hard. You think it is staged? Poirot did not answer at once. He walked through the corridor past the waiting policeman, and only when we were alone in the lift did he speak. Staged, he said. Yes, but staged by whom? That is the theatre. And how? I asked. He cannot vanish without leaving the plane. Poirot looked at me with that faint, exasperated affection he reserves for my thickest moments. Hastings, he said, you still ask the wrong question. He tapped his temple. Not, how did he leave? He paused, letting the lift rise. But, was he ever truly there when you believed he was? Chapter 3. The Man in the Wrong Seat. Poirot's remark in the lift annoyed me at first, as his remarks often do when they imply my brain is decorative. Of course he was there, I protested when we reached our rooms. They spoke to him. They saw him. Verhaeghe says he looked up and saw him in his seat. Poirot removed his gloves with care. Yes. They saw a man in the seat they believed was Monsieur d'Aubel's. That is not the same thing. You're suggesting an impostor on a private plane with people who knew him? Poirot's eyes were bright. People know what they expect to see, especially in a confined space where the mind is lazy, the engine is loud, and the light is not kind. There are conditions, Hastings, that make the obvious invisible. He crossed to the writing desk and rang for coffee, as though we were discussing the weather. Besides, he added, in every disappearance there are two crimes, the disappearance itself and the preparation. Before I could answer, there came a knock. Inspector Joubert entered, looking pleased with himself, which is never a good sign. "We have found something," he announced. "In the aircraft, under the seat believed to be Monsieur Dobell's." He produced a small envelope with tweezers, as if it might bite. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Joubert placed it on the table. Poirot did not touch it. He read it where it lay, his eyes moving quickly. It was a fragment torn from a larger sheet. In a firm hand were written only 3 words: HAREN, 12 minutes. And beneath that, as if underlined by fate, a faint smear of red-brown that could only be old blood. Joubert looked triumphant. A note, a clue. Perhaps he planned to jump. Perhaps it is a message. Poirot's expression was unreadable. Or perhaps it is bait. Bait? Poirot glanced at me. For the police. Or for a detective. Joubert bristled. "You think we planted it?" "I think nothing yet," Poirot replied mildly. "I merely respect the intelligence of criminals. They often leave what they wish you to find." Joubert tapped the paper. "What is 12 minutes?" Poirot did not answer. Instead he asked, "Inspector, who had access to the aircraft after landing?" Joubert hesitated. "The pilot, the mechanic, the police." "And before the police sealed it?" "A few airport staff, perhaps. But we have names." Poirot nodded. "Bring me the pilot and the mechanic." They arrived within the hour. Captain de Smet, thin-faced and rigid with professional shame, and Jan Verbruggen, the mechanic, broad-shouldered and defensive. The pilot spoke first, his voice tight. "Monsieur Poirot, I swear to you we landed normally. I did not see him leave. I would have heard a scream. I would have felt a shift." Poirot's gaze was gentle. "You feel responsible." "I am responsible," de Smet said. "It is my aircraft in the air, even if I do not own it." Poirot turned to the mechanic. "And you, Monsieur Verbruggen, you heard the noise?" "Yes," the mechanic said. "A clack, like a latch. I called back. Monsieur Dobell answered." "In French?" The mechanic blinked. "Yes." Poirot's eyes sharpened. And the voice. It was his? The mechanic frowned, then looked uncomfortable. "It was a man's voice. With the engine, you do not hear clearly." "Ah," said Poirot softly. "You do not hear clearly." He paced once, a small movement, but it changed the temperature of the room. "Tell me," Poirot asked, "the rear exit, can it be opened from inside without effort?" The mechanic shrugged. "It is stiff. It is not like a car door. You must lift the latch and pull. And there is wind pressure. In flight it resists." Poirot's fingers steepled. "So a man cannot open it like opening a cupboard?" "No." "And if he did open it, there would be a rush of air?" "Yes." "A noise?" "Yes." "And 4 passengers in a small cabin would feel it?" The pilot nodded sharply. "Exactly." Poirot smiled. "Then I ask you, gentlemen, did anyone report a rush of air?" Both men shook their heads. Poirot looked at Joubert. "Inspector, the statements? Do they mention wind or a sudden cold or papers fluttering?" Joubert's mouth tightened. "No." Poirot's smile vanished. "Then the door did not open in flight." Joubert stared. "But it was unlatched on landing." Poirot nodded. "Unlatched, yes, that is a different thing. It may have been unlatched while the aircraft was on the ground. Or it may have been unlatched deliberately to suggest it was opened in the air." I felt a chill. "Then where is Dobell?" Poirot's eyes were calm. "Not in the sky, Hastings." The pilot swallowed. "Monsieur Poirot, are you saying he never left the plane?" Poirot shook his head. I am saying the plane is an excellent distraction. Everyone stares at it. Newspapers draw little diagrams. Police examine latches. Meanwhile, the real movement happens somewhere else. Joubert frowned. What movement? Poirot nodded toward the note on the table. HAREN, 12 minutes. Poirot looked at the pilot. Captain de Smet, from touchdown to the moment the steps are put and passengers disembark, how long? The pilot blinked, then answered automatically. It depends. Taxiing, stopping, engines down, steps, perhaps 10 to 12 minutes. Poirot's gaze returned to the scrap of paper. 12 minutes, he murmured. Not a time until something happens. A time during which something can happen. Joubert's face changed. You mean, someone could have left during the taxi, before anyone stood up? Poirot nodded. Or something could have been exchanged. A man can disappear without ever opening a door in flight. I stared at him. But the cabin is sealed. There are windows. Poirot's eyes flicked to me, almost amused. Windows are very useful things, Hastings. They show you what you are meant to look at. Joubert made an impatient sound. Stop speaking in riddles. Poirot bowed slightly. As you wish, Inspector. I will be plain. He pointed at the passenger list Joubert had laid out. 4 passengers, Poirot said. 4 accounts, all neatly arranged. And yet none of them reports the one thing that must occur if a door opens in the air. Therefore the story of the door is theatre. He tapped the note. This, 12 minutes, suggests a window of opportunity. During taxi and engine-down procedures, the cockpit crew are busy. The passengers are seated. The noise of the engines continues. An event can occur without dramatic wind or screaming. He turned to the mechanic. Is there any access point to the cabin from outside while the aircraft is on the ground that is not obvious to passengers? The mechanic hesitated. There is a service hatch for the baggage compartment. It opens from outside. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And where is the baggage compartment? In the rear, the mechanic admitted. Behind the seats, there is a panel. Poirot nodded once, satisfied. Inspector, he said, take me to the aircraft, now. We went at once. In the hangar, the plane looked even smaller, like a toy that had caused grown men to panic. The mechanic showed the hatch, a small, neat panel on the fuselage low at the rear. He opened it with a key. Inside was a narrow compartment, lined with straps and brackets for luggage. Poirot peered in, then straightened. Tell me, he asked the mechanic, could a man, small, agile, fit here? The mechanic laughed, then stopped when he saw Poirot's face. It would be tight, he said slowly, but yes, a small man could. Joubert stared. You think Dobell hid in his own baggage hold? Poirot's voice was quiet. Perhaps. Or perhaps someone else did. I felt suddenly absurdly light-headed. The idea was too theatrical, too much like a cheap serial. And yet Poirot's eyes were not theatrical. They were cold and exact. Poirot pointed to the cabin floor, just above the compartment. Here is the trick, he said. If a man leaves his seat, opens a panel, and slips down into the compartment while the aircraft is taxiing, no wind, no scream. Only a movement that can be missed if your attention is captured. And who captured their attention? I asked. Poirot's gaze returned to the list of names. Exactly, he said. Now we find the person who provided the distraction. Joubert's voice was hard. And what about the blood on the note? Poirot's expression darkened. Yes, that is the unpleasant part. He looked at me, and for the first time since Brussels, I saw something like warning in his eyes. "It may be," he said, "that Monsieur Dobell did not vanish to save himself." He paused. "It may be that he vanished to be removed." Dear listeners, thank you for your loyalty and for spending time with this story. If you're listening on YouTube, quick heads up, you're missing out. Right now, YouTube gets one new story a week. But on Patreon, listeners get 3 brand new stories every week, and there's already a whole stack of episodes you haven't heard yet. You also get access to our full back catalog. In fact, we've removed over 100 stories from YouTube, so there's a lot you won't find on the channel anymore. And if Patreon isn't an option, join us on Spotify. You'll get 2 new stories a week, plus our entire back catalog, the same library as Patreon. It's the easiest way to catch up on everything. If you'd like to support the show in a simpler way, you can also back us with a one-off tip on Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal. This podcast is now fully supported by listeners on Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and PayPal, so if the support isn't there, the show may have to stop, even though we really don't want that. All links are in the description. Now, let's get back to our story, shall we? Chapter 4. The Distraction That Paid. Inspector Joubert stared into the open hatch as though he expected a corpse to politely introduce itself. The compartment was empty, of course. Empty things are the most irritating. They offer the imagination too much room to misbehave. Poirot, however, was not disappointed. He was interested. "Close it," he told the mechanic. "Again." Verbruggen obeyed. The panel clicked shut with a neat, final sound. Poirot crouched, awkwardly for him, but determined, and ran his fingers along the edge of the hatch. He did not tug or rattle it like a man performing for witnesses. He simply felt it, as though reading a line of Braille. Then he stood, brushed his hands, and looked at the mechanic. "This key," he said. "Who holds it?" Verbruggen shifted. "I do, and the pilot. And at HAREN, the ground supervisor has a spare for emergencies." Poirot nodded, filing it away. "And yesterday, before the police sealed the aircraft, how many persons came close to this hatch?" Verbruggen glanced at Joubert, then back at Poirot. "Baggage staff. One man helped unload, another brought the steps." "And their names?" Joubert made an impatient sound, but he produced them. 2 names on a list, both ordinary enough to hide in a crowd. Poirot did not ask to see the men immediately. That, I learned, was because he already knew the first answer would not be found in their faces. He went back inside the cabin. "Now," he said, "we test something else." He took my arm and placed me by the rear seats. "Hastings," he said, "you are Monsieur Avery. You have charm. You have a story. You have the desire to be noticed. Speak to me." "About what?" "About anything," said Poirot. "That is the gift." I began, rather foolishly, to describe a cricket match I had once seen, adding flourishes in what I supposed was Avery's style. Poirot listened with exaggerated attention. Then, while I spoke, he moved, softly, efficiently. He stood, crossed the small aisle, bent, and reached beneath the seat that had belonged to Monsieur Dobell. A moment later he was back in front of me as though he had never moved at all. "Did you see?" he asked. "No," I admitted, annoyed. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And you were looking at me, in a cabin with 4 people, with engine noise, with polite talk. Movement can be swallowed." Joubert frowned. So Avery distracted. "Or le maire," Poirot said, "or madame, or Verhege, or all of them together, each in his own way." He went to the small table where the passengers had eaten. "Inspector," Poirot asked, "did the police take the remains of the luncheon?" Joubert blinked. "The wrappers? Yes. Why?" Poirot's voice was mild. because poison is as old as greed, and because rich men do not always vanish alive. Joubert stiffened and gestured to an officer who hurried off. Poirot turned to me. "Hastings," he said quietly, "we will not imagine a man climbing into that compartment for comfort. It is not comfort. It is concealment or transport." "Transport?" I repeated. Poirot's gaze moved to the hangar doors. "A private aeroplane is not only a vehicle in the air. It is also a private place on the ground, and private places are useful to those who wish to exchange things without witnesses." Joubert's face hardened. "You mean a body?" Poirot did not deny it. He merely said, "I mean an object that cannot walk through an airport." We returned to the hotel, and Joubert, now less triumphant, agreed to bring the passengers again. This time he did not offer them velvet chairs and discretion. He offered them time, which is far more uncomfortable. They arrived separately, each escorted, each maintaining the air of a person inconvenienced by vulgarity. Poirot received them with the same polite calm as before, but I noticed something. He did not sit. He stood. Poirot stands when he intends to press. "Monsieur Avery," Poirot began, "you are an investor?" "Indeed," Avery said smoothly, "and I am also a victim of this absurdity." Poirot's eyes remained pleasant. "You are a man who understands opportunity." Avery's smile did not move, but the skin around it tightened. "Opportunity is simply preparedness, Monsieur Poirot." "Excellent," said Poirot. "Then you will be prepared to answer. What were the terms of your arrangement with Monsieur Dobell?" "My arrangement?" "Yes," Poirot said. "The money you put in, the money you expected out, the timing." Avery spread his hands. "Private business." Poirot nodded. "Of course. Private. Like an aircraft, like a rear hatch, like 12 minutes of taxiing." At the words, Avery's expression flickered. So quick I might have missed it, had Poirot not been watching for precisely that kind of flicker. Poirot turned without pausing. "Monsieur le Maire, you are a partner and a rival." Le Maire's jowls tightened. "He was alive when we took off. That is all you need." Poirot's tone sharpened slightly. "No, monsieur, that is all you wish to offer." Le Maire leaned forward. "Are you accusing me?" Poirot replied, "I do not accuse yet. I arrange facts. Tell me, did Monsieur Dobell threaten to remove you from the business?" Le Maire's eyes flashed. "He threatened everyone. That was his hobby." Poirot nodded. "And did he threaten you yesterday morning?" Le Maire hesitated. Just long enough. "We spoke, yes." "About what?" "About control," Le Maire said, forcing disdain. He wanted more. Always more. Poirot's gaze slid to Madame de Rochefort. "Madame," he said softly, "you said he intended to survive. Did he tell you he feared an attempt on his life?" Her eyes were cool. "He feared boredom more than death." Poirot's voice stayed gentle. "Did he tell you he planned to disappear?" Madame's lips curved. "If he did, Monsieur Poirot, do you imagine I would repeat it to the police?" Poirot accepted this without offense. Then he turned to Verhaeghe. "Monsieur Verhaeghe," he said, "you are the careful man, the man who writes notes." Verhaeghe stiffened. "I have cooperated fully." "Perhaps," Poirot said. "Then you will show me your notebook from the flight." Verhaeghe's color changed. "It is with the police." Joubert frowned. "We have it." Poirot nodded. "Bring it." When the notebook arrived, Poirot did not open it immediately. He weighed it in his hand like a judge weighing a sentence. Then he flipped to the page corresponding to the flight time. There was writing, yes, but not the kind one expects from a secretary taking practical notes. It was too neat, too spaced, too deliberate. Poirot looked up. "You were not recording," he said. "You were copying." Verhaeghe's mouth tightened. "Copying what?" Poirot turned the notebook so they could see. Between lines of ordinary shorthand were several blocks of numbers, account-like, structured with dashes and separators. "A ledger," Poirot said. "Or an instruction." Lemaire's face went suddenly hard. Avery's eyes narrowed. Madame de Rochefort watched, amused, as though men scrambling was her favorite entertainment. Joubert leaned in. "This proves—" Poirot cut him off gently. "It proves only that Monsieur Verhaeghe was carrying something valuable in his head and wished it to exist on paper." Verhaeghe's voice was strained. "Monsieur Dobell ordered it." "Perhaps," Poirot said, "or perhaps you ordered yourself." He closed the notebook. "And now," he continued, "we come to the theatre of the door. Inspector Joubert tells me it was found unlatched." Avery spoke quickly. "I already said I did not touch it." "And you, Monsieur le Maire, did not touch it. And Madame did not touch it. And Monsieur Verhaeghe did not touch it," Poirot said, calm as ever. "How fortunate. Then the door unlatched itself. Like a miracle." No one smiled. Poirot's gaze settled on Madame de Rochefort. "Madame," he said, "you claim you slept." "Yes. Yet you also claim you heard a noise." "I heard something." Poirot nodded. "A small noise, you said. Metal. A latch. And you did not open your eyes." Madame's smile returned. "I do not open my eyes for every little sound." "Non," Poirot agreed. "Only for the sounds that matter." He stepped closer, not threatening, simply present. "And tell me, Madame, did Monsieur Dobell ever give you a rug before?" Her eyes narrowed. "What nonsense is this?" Poirot's voice was quiet. "It is not nonsense. It is habit. People remember habits. If a man who never serves anyone suddenly stands to fetch a rug, it is either love or performance." Madame's composure held, but I saw it now, a faint tension at the corner of her jaw. Poirot turned away. "Inspector," he said, "I want 3 things." Joubert's voice was curt. "Name them." "First, the ground staff who handled baggage and steps, questioned them about those 12 minutes. Second, a search of Monsieur Dobell's Brussels office, particularly his safe and his recent correspondence. Third, most important, locate a man who had reason to be at HAREN yesterday morning and vanish after 12 minutes. "A man?" Joubert demanded. "What man?" Poirot's eyes were cold. "The man who was in Monsieur Dobell's seat," he said. "The man whose voice answered the mechanic. The man your respectable passengers were too busy not looking to notice." He paused, letting the words land. "And if we find him," Poirot added, "we will learn whether Monsieur Dobell arranged his own disappearance or whether someone arranged it for him." As the passengers were escorted out, Avery's charm faltered for the briefest instant. Le Maire looked as though he had swallowed a coin. Verhaeghe stared at the floor like a man hearing his own chains. Madame de Rochefort, last to leave, gave Poirot a look that was almost appreciative. In the corridor, I caught up with Poirot. "You truly think there was another man on the plane?" Poirot did not look at me. He looked past me, toward the city, toward the aerodrome, toward the invisible lines of money and fear that connect one man's life to another man's hands. "I think," he said, "that when 4 people agree they saw what they expected, the 5th person, the unexpected one, becomes invisible." "And what now?" Poirot's mouth tightened. "Now," he said, "we discover what Monsieur Dobell was carrying that was worth making a man vanish without opening a door in the sky. Chapter 5. 12 minutes on the tarmac. It is a mistake to imagine that airports are modern inventions of noise and hurry. Even in those early days of aviation, there was the same uneasy combination. Men rushing about with papers, other men pretending not to rush because they had uniforms, and everyone pretending that a machine in the sky was a perfectly sensible way to travel. Poirot and I returned to HAREN with Inspector Joubert before noon. Joubert had arranged to speak again with the ground staff, and he did so with the grim satisfaction of a man permitted to be discourteous to people who are not rich. 2 men were brought in, a steps attendant and a baggage handler. Both smelled faintly of oil and cold air. Both looked as though they had already been questioned by 3 different officials and would happily be questioned by none. Poirot let Joubert begin. It was a kindness and a strategy. People often reveal more when a policeman does the blunt work first. Joubert asked about the landing, the taxi, the steps, the luggage. The answers were ordinary. Then Poirot stepped forward. "Monsieur," he said, "I will ask only about time. When did you first approach the aircraft?" The steps attendant scratched his chin. "Soon as it stopped." The pilot waved. "I brought the steps." "And before you brought the steps?" Poirot asked. The man shrugged. "I waited. You don't run under propellers." Poirot nodded. "How long between the aircraft stopping and the steps being placed?" The man hesitated, then answered, 10 minutes, maybe. Could be 12. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "And during those 10 or 12 minutes," Poirot continued, "did anyone approach the rear of the aircraft?" The attendant blinked. "Rear? No. Why would they?" Poirot turned to the baggage handler. "And you, monsieur?" The baggage man shifted his weight. "We go to the rear after the passengers are down. That's normal." Poirot's voice remained mild. Yes, but sometimes, monsieur, normal is interrupted." "Did anything interrupt it yesterday?" The baggage handler opened his mouth, shut it, then said grudgingly, "There was a man." Joubert snapped his head around. "What man?" The baggage handler looked uncomfortable now, as though he had remembered a detail that would make his day worse. "A man in a coat," he said. "Not uniform. He came from the office building, walking fast like he owned the place." Poirot's tone stayed quiet. "And what did he do?" "He spoke to the pilot," the baggage handler said. "Quick. Then he went to the rear." Joubert leaned in. "To the rear hatch?" The man nodded. "Yes," like he knew it. "He had something, like a bag, small. He opened the panel and put it inside." I felt the hairs rise at the back of my neck. Poirot asked, "How long was he there?" "A minute," the handler said, "maybe less. Then he shut it and he walked away, toward the road." Joubert's face darkened. "Did you stop him?" The man stared at Joubert as though he were mad. "Stop him? We don't stop men in good coats who talk to pilots, not unless we want trouble." Poirot nodded once. "Describe him." The baggage handler did so. Average height, dark coat, hat low, quick, purposeful walk. Nothing distinctive except, perhaps, that very lack of distinctiveness. "And his face?" Poirot asked. The man shrugged helplessly. "I saw his jaw more than his face, like this." He indicated his own chin, a little square. Poirot's eyes flicked to Joubert. A man who knows the hatch. A man who speaks to the pilot as if he has the right. And a man who arrives from the office building, not from the baggage area. Joubert's voice was tight. "We will find him." Poirot did not argue, but I knew that "we will find him" is often what policemen say when they have nothing else to say. We left them there with Joubert barking orders, and Poirot drew me aside out of the wind. "You see, Hastings," he said, 12 minutes. "You think he put Dobell in the compartment?" I asked. Poirot gave me a look that suggested I had just tried to solve chess by eating the pieces. "No. If a man put a living man there, there would be struggle. If he put a dead man there, there would be weight, blood, something. What he put inside was small. A bag." "A bag of what?" Poirot's gaze drifted toward the hangars. "Of what Monsieur Dobell truly carried. Not a body, Hastings, but a burden." We returned to Brussels and went straight to Monsieur Dobell's office, accompanied by 2 officers and a clerk with keys. The building was respectable. Stone, polished brass, a lobby that smelled of ink and obedience. His private office had been sealed. Inside, everything was arranged with the cold neatness of a man who believed order could substitute for kindness. The desk was immaculate. The chairs were placed as though awaiting permission to be used. A safe sat behind a framed landscape. Joubert's clerk opened it. Inside were documents, a small cash box, and a stack of letters tied with ribbon. Joubert reached for them at once, but Poirot's hand lifted gently. "Allow," Poirot said. "Paper is like people. If you handle it too quickly, it tears." Poirot examined the letters first, not reading them, not yet, but noting the ribbon, the thickness, the slight bulge that indicated enclosures. Then he opened the cash box. It was empty. Joubert swore under his breath. "Removed." Poirot nodded. "Not removed. Taken." He finally selected one letter from the tied bundle and held it up to the light. The paper was expensive. The writing was careful. He read, and as he read, I watched his face change. Not with shock, but with that sharpening concentration that always means the case has stopped being puzzling and started being clear. He handed it to me. It was not a love letter. It was not even a threat. It was a list. Names, amounts, dates, and beside several of them a single word in French. PAYÉ. Paid. At the bottom, in the same hand, a final line. "If you do not cooperate, the list goes to the press and to the ministry." I looked up. Blackmail. Poirot's eyes stayed on the safe. Or protection, or insurance. It depends who holds the paper and who holds the fear. Joubert took the letter, his jaw tight. "Who wrote it?" Poirot did not answer immediately. He pointed instead to the edge of the safe door. "Inspector," he said, "look." There, almost invisible, unless you had Poirot's habit of seeing what others miss, was a faint smear of reddish-brown, old, rubbed, as though someone had cut a finger and then turned a dial. Joubert's face hardened. "Blood!" Poirot nodded. "And not from a dramatic struggle, from haste." He stepped back and surveyed the room again. "Someone came here after the disappearance," I said. "Or before it," Poirot corrected. "If you plan a vanishing, Hastings, you do not leave the dangerous papers behind." Joubert barked an order to his men to search drawers, wastebaskets, the underside of the desk. They found nothing. Poirot, meanwhile, went to the window and looked down at the street. He did not look like a man admiring architecture. He looked like a man checking exits. Then he spoke without turning. "Monsieur Avery," he said quietly. I blinked. "Avery?" Poirot turned back. "The Englishman smiles too easily. He speaks too much. He is exactly the kind of man who can keep 3 people's attention while one man does one small, fatal thing." "But Le Maire," I began. "Le Maire is obvious," Poirot said. "And obvious men are useful to clever men. They make excellent scenery." He lifted the blackmail letter again, tapped the PAYÉ marks. "And the sums are written in sterling as well as francs," he added. "That is not Belgian habit." Joubert stared. "You're saying the Englishman is at the centre?" Poirot's voice stayed calm. "I am saying the Englishman is close enough to the centre that he smells of it." We returned to the hotel to find a message waiting. Joubert had located a witness from the road outside HAREN, a taxi driver who had taken a gentleman in a dark coat from the aerodrome toward Brussels, quickly, urgently, shortly after the landing. The driver remembered one detail: the man's hands. He wore gloves, the driver said, but one glove was torn here, at the finger. Poirot's eyes flicked to me. "A torn glove," he murmured, "and blood on the safe." Joubert leaned forward. "We arrest Avery." Poirot shook his head. "Not yet." Joubert bristled. "Why not?" Poirot's gaze was steady. "Because if Avery is merely the smile, we need the hand that moved, and because Monsieur Dobell, alive or dead, has been made secondary to something else." "What?" I asked. Poirot looked at the blackmail letter again, then at the notebook page of Verhaeghe's copied numbers. "The list," he said softly, "a list that ruins men." He folded the letter with meticulous care. "Now," Poirot said, "we stop chasing the door in the sky, and we chase what was exchanged in those 12 minutes. He turned to Joubert. "Inspector," he added, "bring Monsieur Avery to me, politely. Tell him it is only to clarify a detail. And while he is here, send men to watch Monsieur le Maire and Madame de Rochefort." Joubert frowned. "Madame, too?" Poirot's eyes were cold. "Madame sleeps when it suits her," he said. "And the most dangerous people are those who can sleep beside a crime." As Joubert left, I watched Poirot, small, neat, utterly certain, set the pieces in his mind. And for the first time, it occurred to me that Monsieur Dobell's disappearance might not be the crime at all. It might merely be the cover. Some of you have asked if there's another way to support us right now. There is one we'd like to share, and it's something my wife and I created together. Alongside Nocturnal Tales, we wrote a children's book called Sherlock Paws and the Diamond of the Nile, available on Amazon. It's a classic detective story, reimagined for younger readers, with one important twist. Sherlock Holmes is a dog. In this story, Sherlock Paws and his loyal companion Dr. Spot set off on an adventure to Egypt, where a valuable diamond has vanished. With noses twitching and tails wagging, they rely on observation, logic, and attention to detail to uncover the truth. It's a mystery full of friendship, travel, and discovery, adventurous, but always warm and age-appropriate. The goal of the book is simple: to introduce children to detective thinking in a way that feels playful and engaging. Instead of noise and spectacle, the story rewards curiosity. Children are encouraged to notice clues, think things through, and enjoy how small details matter, just as they do in classic mysteries. If you have children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, or young readers in your family, this is a story we genuinely believe they might enjoy. And if you're looking for a way to support our work during this difficult period, purchasing the book helps us directly, while giving something tangible, thoughtful, and fun in return. As always, there's no obligation. We simply wanted to share something we made together with the same care we put into everything else. The link is in the description, and thank you truly for being here. Chapter 6. The List That Ruins Men. That evening, Monsieur Avery came to Poirot's sitting room with the air of a man arriving to forgive you for wasting his time. He was immaculate, tie perfect, hair obedient, smile deployed at the correct angle for sympathy and superiority. Only his eyes, when he thought no one watched, moved too quickly. "My dear Monsieur Poirot," he began, "Inspector Joubert tells me you have questions. I assure you, I am as bewildered as anyone." Poirot offered him a chair and did not sit himself. "It is precisely because you are an Englishman, Monsieur Avery," Poirot said mildly, "that you are in danger." Avery's smile held. In danger of what? Of believing your charm is a substitute for logic. Avery gave a soft laugh. Logic? In a case like this? Poirot turned his head slightly. Hastings, will you be so good as to fetch the inspector? Joubert entered at once, followed by 2 officers. Behind them came the others, Le Maire, red-faced, Verhaeghe, pale, Madame de Rochefort, perfectly composed and very curious. Avery's smile faltered for the first time. What is this? Some sort of theatre? Poirot inclined his head. Yes, but not yours, monsieur. Mine. He went to the table and placed 3 items upon it with care. Verhaeghe's notebook, open to the page of copied numbers. The torn scrap, HAREN, 12 minutes. The blackmail letter from the safe, names, sums, and PAYÉ. These, Poirot said, are not mysteries. They are instructions. Le Maire snorted. Instructions for what? Poirot looked at him calmly. For profit, Monsieur le Maire. Sit down. Your indignation is becoming repetitive. Le Maire sat furious. Poirot turned to Joubert. Inspector, tell them what your men found after you followed my requests. Joubert's mouth tightened. The taxi driver identified Verhaeghe as the man with the torn glove. Verhaeghe jerked. That's a lie. Joubert continued, relentless. He remembered the voice, the posture, and, most clearly, how the man held his left hand stiffly, as if it hurt. Verhaeghe's face drained. Poirot did not gloat. He simply added, and the blood on the safe dial in Monsieur Dobell's office, very little, very smeared, exactly what happens when a man cuts a finger in haste and refuses to stop. Verhaeghe's lips moved, but no words came. Poirot turned his attention to Madame de Rochefort. Madame, he said softly, you were right about one thing. Monsieur Dobell intended to survive. Madame smiled. Naturally. Poirot nodded. But he intended to survive other people's knowledge, and that is more difficult. He tapped the blackmail letter. This list, Poirot said, was power. It was not romance. It was not even finance. It was leverage, names that could be ruined, payments that could be explained only with shame. Avery's voice cut in, pleasant but sharp. You are drifting into melodrama, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot looked at him. No, I am drifting into motive. Poirot picked up the torn scrap. HAREN, 12 minutes, he said. Not poetry, not a suicide note. A schedule, a window, from the moment the aircraft touched down to the moment the steps were placed. He looked at the group. In that window, a man in a good coat approached the rear hatch and placed a small bag inside. Joubert's eyes were hard. Our baggage handler saw it. Poirot nodded. A small bag, not a body, not even a large bundle of cash. He tapped Verhaeghe's notebook. A list. Figures. Instructions. Copied in flight. Because a man who fears robbery makes duplicates. Verhaeghe whispered, Monsieur Dobell ordered me to... Poirot raised a hand. Yes, he ordered you, because you were useful, and because you were afraid of him. Poirot turned to Avery again. Now, he said, we come to the part everyone likes, the vanishing in mid-air. Avery's smile returned, thin as paper. Finally, Poirot's voice stayed calm. It did not happen. Silence landed in the room with a dull weight. Poirot continued. If the rear door had opened in flight, there would have been a rush of air, papers moving, a sudden cold. None of you described it. Not one. Therefore the door is theatre. It was left unlatched on the ground to satisfy the imagination, and the newspapers. Le Maire muttered, Then where is he? Poirot looked at him. "Not in the sky." Poirot stepped closer to the table, and his tone sharpened, still polite, but now with an edge that made even Joubert look alert. "The truth is simple," Poirot said, "so simple that it offends you." He lifted a finger. "First, the man you believe you saw on the aircraft, Monsieur Dobell, was not Monsieur Dobell." Avery laughed. "Nonsense." Poirot ignored him. "Second, you were all easy to deceive because you each had your own reason not to look too closely. Monsieur le Maire was absorbed in his resentment. Madame was absorbed in her comfort. Monsieur Avery was absorbed in being noticed. Monsieur Verhaeghe was absorbed in copying what he feared to lose." Verhaeghe's voice cracked. "Who was on the plane then?" Poirot answered softly. "A stand-in. A man dressed like Monsieur Dobell. A similar build. A hat placed correctly. A collar raised. In that cabin, with the engine noise and your laziness, it was enough." Joubert snapped. "You have proof?" Poirot nodded. The mechanic heard Monsieur Dobell answer him, but admitted he could not recognize the voice clearly. And, more important, Madame de Rochefort. Madame raised an eyebrow. Poirot's gaze held hers. "You said he stood once to fetch you a rug, but you also said you slept as long as you wished. A woman like you does not sleep through a man moving in a narrow cabin unless she is already half decided not to remember." Madame's smile thinned. "Careful, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot inclined his head, always. He turned back to the others. "Third, the real crime was not a disappearance. It was the theft of the list, and the removal of the man who held it." Avery's voice was suddenly flat. "You are accusing me of murder." Poirot's eyes were cold. "I accuse you of arranging events. Murder is simply what happens when arrangements meet panic." Joubert barked, "Where is Dobell?" Poirot answered at once. In his Brussels office he was attacked, either late the night before or early that morning before anyone would notice his absence. He was removed quickly. The blood on the safe is not his, it is Verhaeghe's, from opening it under pressure. The safe was emptied of what mattered. The aircraft story was constructed to buy time and scatter attention across the channel and the clouds. Verhaeghe whispered, "No, no." Poirot's gaze snapped to him. "You helped, Monsieur Verhaeghe, not from loyalty, but from fear. Monsieur Dobell had you in his pocket. Monsieur Avery offered you a way out." Avery's face hardened. "This is fantasy." Poirot's voice cut cleanly through it. "Then explain your 12 minutes, Monsieur Avery." Avery stared. Poirot continued, relentless now. "Explain the man at HAREN who spoke to the pilot as if he belonged there. Explain the bag placed in the hatch. Explain the taxi driver who remembers the torn glove and the injured finger. Explain why your charm disappears the moment someone uses dates and times instead of feelings." Avery's jaw worked. For a moment I thought he would deny it again, but denial requires confidence, and Poirot had taken his. Avery exhaled, very controlled. "You cannot prove who wrote that list." Poirot nodded. "True, but I can prove who needed it destroyed." He tapped the blackmail letter. Sterling noted beside Frank's. British habit, British fear. And the word PAYÉ beside names that would ruin a London man twice as fast as a Belgian one. Joubert stepped forward. "Monsieur Avery, you are under arrest on suspicion of—" Avery's hand moved toward his pocket. Before he could do anything foolish, Poirot's voice cracked like a whip. "Non." Avery froze. 2 officers seized him. Madame de Rochefort watched the arrest as though it were an opera. Tragic, predictable, and pleasingly well performed. Le Maire rose half an inch, then sat again, defeated by the realization that his obviousness had nearly made him a convenient culprit. Verhaeghe sagged, whispering, He said he would protect me. Poirot looked at him with a kind of weary contempt. Men like Monsieur Avery do not protect, Poirot said. They purchase. Joubert nodded to his officers. Verhaeghe was taken as well. When the room emptied, it was only Poirot and I, with the city's dull winter light pressing against the window. "So Dobell is dead," I said quietly. Poirot's face did not soften. "Almost certainly." "And the body?" Poirot looked down at the street again, as he had in the office, checking exits, always exits. "The body will appear," he said. "It was removed quickly, hidden temporarily, then discarded when the noise became too great. In cases like this, Hastings, the dead are never the priority. The living are." He adjusted his cuffs with fastidious care. "And now," Poirot added, "Belgium will stop staring at the sky and begin properly to look at the ground." Epilogue. 2 days later they found Monsieur Dobell in the most ordinary place imaginable. Not in a field beneath a flight path, not in the sea, but in a storage space along a canal, wrapped, weighted, and treated like an inconvenient object. The newspapers were disappointed. There was no miracle after all, only greed, blackmail, and the small cowardice of men who believe money can purchase invisibility. Poirot read the final report in silence, then folded it. "You see, Hastings," he said at last, "a door in the sky is dramatic. But the true exits are always on the ground, hidden in paperwork, in habits, and in those 12 minutes when everyone believes nothing important can happen." He looked at me, eyes bright. "And that," he concluded, "is exactly when it does." The True Crime, Alfred Lowenstein, 1928. On the evening of July 4th, 1928, Alfred Lowenstein, Belgian financier and one of the richest men in Europe, boarded his private aircraft at Croydon for a routine flight to Brussels. The plane was a Fokker F-7A/3M trimotor, GEBYI, carrying a small party of associates and crew. Somewhere over the English Channel, Lowenstein left his seat to use the small lavatory at the rear. In that aircraft's layout, the lavatory sat off a short passage. Next to it was the main cabin entrance door. According to those on board, Lowenstein did not return. His secretary went aft, found the lavatory empty, and discovered the door to the outside open and flapping in the slipstream. The group's immediate explanation was stark. He had fallen somehow out of the aircraft. The aircraft did not continue to Brussels, as if nothing had happened. It made an emergency landing in France, first reported as landing on a beach, then transferring to an airfield, and authorities were alerted. From the beginning, the story split into competing theories. 1. Accident, the wrong door. The simplest version claimed Lowenstein opened the wrong door and stepped into open air, but early investigators and later writers questioned whether that door could be opened easily in flight at all, especially by mistake. Reports described tests by the British Air Ministry suggesting the door was extremely difficult to force open in the slipstream, undermining the simple accident narrative. 2. Suicide. Because Lowenstein's business world was full of pressure, rivals, and financial stakes, suicide was floated almost immediately in press coverage and popular retellings. Yet the same mechanical question haunted this theory too. Even a deliberate leap requires opening a door that may have resisted opening. 3. Foul play. Locked room in the sky. The most enduring suspicion is that someone else engineered his fall, by force, deception, or by manipulating the aircraft's doors and cabin sequence so that witnesses could later swear, truthfully, to what they thought they saw. The case's staying power comes from that contradiction. A small cabin, a handful of witnesses, and a man gone, without a clean, physically satisfying mechanism that convinces everyone. Then came the grim anchor that turned a disappearance into a death. Lowenstein's body was recovered near Boulogne on July 19, 1928, identified by personal effects, notably his wristwatch, per contemporary reporting summarized in later accounts, and an autopsy concluded he had been alive when he hit the water, consistent with a fall rather than a death elsewhere followed by disposal. In other words, whatever happened inside that aircraft, the Channel did not merely swallow a rumor, it swallowed a man. The official lean toward accident never fully smothered the doubts, because the case contains the three ingredients that never age: wealth, access, and a closed setting. A private aircraft is the perfect stage for a mystery. Few witnesses, unfamiliar mechanics, and just enough noise and vibration for human attention to fail at the worst moment. That is why Lowenstein's vanishing remains a classic locked-room crime of the aviation age, less for what we know than for what we cannot make feel physically inevitable, even almost a century later.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of the story. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, do subscribe and share it with someone who appreciates a proper mystery. It helps more than most people think, and it remains one of the simplest ways to help this show continue. If you'd like more stories, you can find our full back catalogue on Patreon and Spotify, with extra new stories there as well. And if you'd like to support our work more directly, you can do so on Patreon. Tiers start at $2.99 with ad-free listening and extra stories, or for occasional support via Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal. All links are in the description. Thank you for listening. And now, be fair before you are certain, and do not let confidence outrun the facts. Good night.